In the first half of this video, I asked you, would you plug into the experience machine? Yes, no, and why? My hope is that you've contributed now to the discussion forum. And one thing that usually happens when I teach this class live in a classroom, I'll ask people whether they would plug in or not to raise their hand. Interestingly, the vast majority of people, like in a room of 300 where I teach it sometimes, we're talking like 290 of the 300 say, no, absolutely not, I would not plug in. There's usually a few people who are like, yeah, I would try this out. Interestingly, that reaction is the basis of an argument. This thought experiment was first introduced by the American philosopher Robert Nozick as part of an argument against a theory of the good life. We're going to talk more about this in our unit on the good life. But the theory of the good life that this thought experiment targets is known as hedonism. And according to hedonism, the good life for a human being is the life of maximal net pleasure. What that means is that living well is a matter of getting the most pleasure you can and avoiding the most pain possible, the most happy feelings. And these are going to include sort of bodily pleasures like tastes. These are also, though, going to include so-called higher pleasures like the satisfying experience of solving a difficult math problem, right? Or the feeling of having meaning in your life. Those are both sort of higher, more elevated pleasures, but they count as pleasures for the hedonist. The hedonist says the more of those you get, the more intense and the less anxiety and the less depression, the less physical pain, the better. Nozick says, look, if hedonism were true, if that were really what the good life is, just getting positive experiences, then the very best thing for me and for you would be to plug into the experience machine. Why? Well, in the experience machine, I can program the most pleasure and the least pain. That's just part of the setup. So to the extent that most of you probably reacted to that thought experiment by thinking, no, I don't want to plug in, Nozick says that means you're not a hedonist about the good life. That means you think there is more to living well than just feeling good and avoiding feeling bad. What more is there to feeling to the good life than pleasure and the avoidance of pain? Well, we will be discussing alternative theories of the good life other than hedonism later in the course, but I introduce this thought experiment not primarily as, for now, in order to give an argument against hedonism, but instead to introduce you to philosophy itself. And the list of reasons that you might have given for or against plugging in, I suspect are going to interestingly line up with precisely the kinds of topics that we'll be studying as philosophers in this course. So some of you might have said, I don't want to plug in to the experience machine because, I see the attraction of pleasure, that's great, but it feels selfish for me to plug in. Like, there's going to be people on the outside who will miss me, maybe even to whom I have obligations that I should stick around and care for, or just continue a real relationship with. And it would be really selfish of me to live this life of pleasure in the experience machine when there's people on the outside who are going to be feeling pain because they miss me, right? That is a kind of moral impulse. It's this feeling of obligation to either people you're already in a relationship with or, maybe like your community or humanity at large. I mean, some people will think, look, I have an obligation to do the most good I can do in the real world, and I won't be doing that in the experience machine. I'll just be floating in goo. Like, at most, I'll have the experience of a fictional experience of curing cancer. Maybe I'd program that for myself. And I wouldn't know the difference, but as a matter of fact, I would not be curing cancer. And so I have an obligation to stay on the outside and do the most good I can. That's a kind of moral reason not to plug in. There's also considerations of knowledge that you'd be losing if you plug in. I mean, a life in the experience machine is a life of just thorough ignorance and a complete severing of your connection with reality. I mean, you're going to be in there thinking, "Boy, it's wonderful that I get to, eat this plant on Mars." And in fact, you will not be on Mars, uh, nor will you be eating some cool space plant. You'll just be in a vat of goo. So, like, you'll be living a kind of deeply deceived life in that way. And you'll be missing out on real possibilities of knowing yourself, knowing the world around you, knowing other people, missing out on opportunities to read about the newest advances in science. You'll have no idea. So you'll be missing knowledge in addition to potentially shirking your moral obligations. Some people will react to this by feeling like you won't really be free. Like, you won't have free will once you're inside the experience machine. I mean, you'll effectively be pre-programmed, and you'll just be doing the bidding of the machine that's pumping you full of these experiences. At no point can you be like, stop, I want to do something else. It's all pre-programmed. So the extent that you feel like I would be losing my autonomy, it seems like that's a reason not to plug in. Now, you'd feel free. This is really important. But what this shows is that the feeling of freedom and freedom itself are two different things. Just as it shows that the feeling of knowledge and knowledge itself are two different things. The feeling of doing what's right and doing what's right are different things. Finally, you might think, look, this is a meaningless life if I chose to do this. And this is related to the point about morality. On one view, meaning in life requires some kind of real impact on the world. And you certainly won't be making any impact of any significance at all by living the rest of your life floating in goo. So those are some possible reasons against plugging in. And then on the other hand, we do have a consideration for plugging in, which is that, hey, feeling good is good for me. Like, I want to feel happy. I want to not feel sad. That's a real value that we have. But there are these competing values that many of us have. We also want to do the right thing. We also want to know. We also want to be free, and we want to live meaningful lives. Philosophy is the study of what we as human beings care most deeply about. To the extent that you've ever thought to yourself, boy, I wonder what it is to live well. I wonder how much pleasure I should get, or if I should sometimes face some pain. I wonder whether I have obligations to other people and what those obligations are. Am I living up to them? I wonder if those obligations vary from one culture to the next. I wonder if there's a God. I wonder if life can really have meaning, especially in the face of our sort of smallness, cosmically speaking. I wonder if free will is possible and if I have it. Any of those questions are philosophical questions, and you can tell because they're questions about the existence and nature of things we care most about. And so one function of the experience machine thought experiment, I think, is to really bring to the fore something that you may have implicitly or perhaps explicitly wrestled with already, which is your deepest values. And it's an interesting it's an interesting thing that the things you care most about, whoever you are listening to this, one of my students, those things also are the topics of philosophy. So I want to invite you, just in conclusion, before we dive into material, to already conceive of yourselves as philosophers. I think that there's a tendency to think of philosophy as something that only happens in history, or something that only happens in very select and elite places among sort of older people or something like that. That's not what philosophy is at all. You are already a philosopher, and what we'll be doing in this course is helping to make you a better philosopher, giving you some tools to improve your thinking as a philosopher, And hopefully by the end, you'll be in a better position to draw some tentative conclusions that perhaps you hadn't drawn already about the nature of philosophical topics. I'm looking forward to this semester. Please do work through the syllabus. Send me any questions you have, and also look at the course schedule. Tomorrow, we will be discussing the Philosopher's Toolbox, and I'll be giving you the main tool of philosophical thinking, which is the argument. See you then.